outline or the points of our course. There are more questions than answers in this, but we just want to keep to it as much as possible. Can you understand me? Can you have this Frankfurt accent, this German accent? Can you get it? They got it for 50 years, so it must work. And then you have here the roadmap, which we have the roadmap, and particularly the second page, B there. You see some of the world religions and how are they connected, and you see on the right side there are the paradigms and of Islam. We have an Islamic scholar and a Muslim with us, and we have a Presbyterian minister with us. We are really ecumenical, so that we say the truth. We'll check each other. And then you see there under Christianity that there are different paradigms, and so I am from the Roman Catholic paradigm, and then Dustin comes from Islam, and then our Presbyterian minister comes from the Reformation paradigm. So Christianity goes to different paradigms, and the Pope we want to talk about, or the popes, they belong to the Roman Catholic paradigm. So we want to concentrate on this. And the question is now how far we know, and I don't want to repeat anything which you know already, but there is no way to know this, what you know, because we cannot possibly ask where you come from or whatever. I will tell you where I'm coming from, but so we will have some lectures, but we will have also discourse, so you can always break in. So I have no idea how far you know about religion as a whole, how much you know about the Abrahamic religions, that is Islam and Christianity and Judaism, how much you know about Catholicism, how much you know about the Roman system inside of Catholicism, which is a specialty and a highly problematic one, and then the papacy. Maybe you have seen a movie of Opus Dei or whatever, but they may not describe the whole thing adequately neither. So we leave that open, and when you have the feeling, that you are lost, there's no child left behind here. Every child will come along, and you will all get A++ in the end, and you will be in heaven. So I never make those promises in my classroom, but here I will do this. Okay, so these are the two documents which we have, and see if they are helpful. And to make it easier for us, we will stick a little bit to it. It's very hard for me to stick to points, but then I will come back to them. So the first point is that you have a right to know where I'm coming from, particularly when we talk about the papacy in a Protestant country, that in itself, and in a secular country. So the context in which we speak is already a little bit complicated. So therefore we all are coming from somewhere, and where we are coming from, that of course influences what we say. The text which we speak has something to do with the context from which we come. So I come from Frankfurt, from Germany, from Nazi Germany, and so on. All that has influenced me, of course, no matter if I get along with it or if I opposed it. So therefore I wanted just to tell you a few little things, and I have a little trailer there. We have the trailer first. Does it work?
Yeah, I gotta find the remote.
And then I will say a few things about it. But I can start already until this technology works, which seldom works. But nevertheless, so I come from Frankfurt in Germany, Frankfurt on the Main. There is another one in the east, which nobody knows. So it's the real one. It's the new Chicago in Germany. It's a banking town. And I lived the first 6 years of my life, I lived in a liberal society, a liberal one, so the Weimar Republic, that was called. And then when Hitler came to power, I was 6 years old, and I joined, a little guy already, the Catholic youth movement. So very early, something happened which is very important for our discussion here. It depends, if we stand on the religious side or if we stand on the secular side. It's very important. If you look at the history of the papacy from the secular side, it looks in one way. If you look at it from the religious or even the theological side, then it looks very different. Now, this is in all of us. This is in our culture, in our personality. This is in our society. We are so used to it that maybe we don't. Technology has worked. Now we have to listen to it. So, if there's any question, you can always come in and ask, right? If there are any words, strange words, or whatever, then I'm glad. Or events which happened, you can then try to explain it a little bit. Now, the important thing here is for our theme, and we want to stick to it, is of course the Pope. So I grew up in the Catholic youth movement, and I was a leader in the Catholic youth movement, and I became early on familiar with this split between, on one side, religion, and on the other side, a secular culture, a secular state. Now, this culture was not liberal anymore, as it is here. It was not socialistic, neither, but it was fascist. So these are 3, 4 powerful theories which are at work in our societies and in our history, and you can see that on television every night. And you see there's a Roosevelt liberal fighting against the democratic socialist, and you see what they have in common or not in common, and then you have another one who has fascist tendencies on the other side, and so they are struggling with each other. And there is a neoliberalism. There are people who have this, and it is not so important what they look like, or if they are men or women or whatever, or black or white, but the theory which moves them, which motivates them, for which they spend their whole life and travel from one place to the other. What a struggle that is. So this theory thing is important. So what I then experienced was, first of all, a state which had made a treaty between the church and the government. That was Hitler. Adolf Hitler was a Catholic. He was baptized as a Catholic. Himmler was a Catholic. The others, Goebbels was a Protestant. They were all baptized. They marched with 4 million men from the countries which are today the European Union, the 28. They marched into Russia, 4 million men. Napoleon only had 800,000. So marched in there and killed 27 million Russians and 6 million Jews. We must emphasize our Jewish brothers because they have suffered tremendously. But we must not forget those 27 million Russians neither. So the Pope at that time, and we will remember him too, was Pius XII. There had been all kinds of pious popes throughout the 19th century who were all very conservative people who emphasized restoration. That is our theme here, restoration, reform, or revolution. So that was Pius XII was a man who emphasized very much to restore the old things, to hold on to the old things. Now, he made a concordat, a treaty, with when he was still not yet Pope, he worked on that concordat, and that concordat allowed then the Catholic youth movement to operate. So it was legitimate, we could gather every week and so on. But then something changed, and the concordat was step by step broken. But it is still valid today. The Hitler Concordat binds today the German Federal Republic. The priests are paid according to the Hitler Concordat, and the Church does not want to change it because it never had it so good. So, but nevertheless, in this change suddenly, Hitler was somewhat disappointed that the Church did not come along so well as he thought. So then my leaders were beaten up, and they were tortured, and they were killed. Some of them were tortured so much that we could not even open up the coffin when we buried them. So that was a horrible experience in a certain way, namely that this relationship, the difference between the secular state, secular society, and religion, the difference turned into an antagonism, into hostility, and I grew up with this. So for 12 years I had this always, and you saw a little bit of this movie when I went also to a humanistic high school with Latin, Greek, and Hebrew and so on, but that's not so important. The important thing is that I was drafted, as it was there when I was 15, to the Air Force. So I was in the German Air Force, and I defended cities there. I defended Mannheim, I defended Mannheim, Heidelberg was never bombed because the American Air Force officers had all their love affairs in Heidelberg when they studied there. But they never a bomb fell there. That's why I took my vacations in Heidelberg all the time. So nevertheless, this was the conflict then, because in the Catholic Youth Movement I had heard that that Hitler's war goals were not legitimate. That means that they were not in conformity to the 7-point Augustinian just war theory, which still the Bush administrations used. So so therefore I didn't go. And then an officer came and he told me I had no choice. So he took me to the airport and I was trained there. And then McGovern was my good friend here, George, who ran for office several times. I was his campaign manager in the 3rd district. He was over Frankfurt. He bombed Frankfurt. And I said, George, if you had been there, if I had been there when you were there, you wouldn't be here now anymore. So, but we remained friends with each other. And he thought that he did something good, namely bombing fascism into the Stone Age. And that was the right way. And I thought of the children and the women in the basements down there and what happens to them, because whenever you see the ruins, there were people under these ruins. Not soldiers, because the soldiers were at the East Front and the West Front, but they were all civilians. So, and well, on Judgment Day, George and I, we will have to meet and we'll see who was right. So, nevertheless, this is this drama. So I did then stay, and I shot 18 bombers down, which didn't help at all. But it was to distract them, that they wouldn't throw their bombs into those houses, because they started with Goethe Street, and then they stopped at Schiller Street, or at the cathedral, and next night they came and they bombed on the other side. How many? 500, 1,000, 1,500, and so on. So it was an unbelievable massacre, and in spite of the fact that I had been raised in opposition to the fascist movement, I thought that to help these cities, or to help these people there, at least to distract them so that they would throw their bombs into the mountains instead of into the houses, I thought that this was a valuable thing to do, and I did this. And then later on I became a lieutenant in the German infantry, and I was supposed to go to Russia and to fight against atheistic Bolshevism. So you have religion on one side, then you have fascism, and then you have communism, and then you have liberalism, and they all are secular. Our liberalism was originally, of course, Protestant, and it was Christian, and so on, but in time it became more and more secularized. So you have these three powerful, and don't underestimate fascism, right? It creeps in when you don't even recognize it, and it has a tremendous attraction to millions of people. So it is not to be underestimated, nor are the other theories, which are very powerful. So nevertheless, I then was supposed to fight in Russia, and the lieutenant of my age would last 4 weeks or so. But then came Patton. My friend Patton came. He was up. He helped there in the Ardennes offensive to free the Americans. You know, this horrible tragedy. 150 of our soldiers died in the Ardennes offensive. So he moved north and liberated them. Then he came south again to Worms and crossed the river, Main River, and that's where I was thrown against him. So I fought against him several weeks, and there were some battles like the Hahnenkampf and so on. And finally, I even threw him out of a town, Alzenau, the town of Alzenau. And this is so important for me because when the city had surrendered already, and I threw him out, and he had to run so fast that he left his hospital behind. So when I got into the hospital, which was in the mayor's house, he treated his own men and the German prisoners the same way. The same medicine, the same doctors. That is the Geneva Convention, see. That is an unbelievable progress, that in this horrible insanity of war, that we have one little moment where somehow peace is anticipated. We will have to live together again after we killed each other. And so when we took over, we did the same thing. So now the Americans were the prisoners, but they got the same medicine and so on. So then I was a prisoner of war, and I was in Norfolk here. And in Norfolk, there were Jewish Secret Service men who spoke German better than I did and knew Frankfurt better than I did. And they did cross-hearings. They never used waterboarding. They never used torture or whatever. They were just intelligent people. When you have intelligent intelligence, you don't need torture. And if you have an unintelligent intelligence, then they use torture and get the wrong information. Because you always, when you're under torture, you always say what they want to hear, and then they have misinformation and make the wrong decisions and start wars without the right information. So this, I was then categorized as an anti-Nazi by these Jewish agents because I had helped Jewish people in Frankfurt with the Catholic Youth Movement. And there was also, not Pacelli, not the Pope, but the Bishop of Münster, who wrote letters against the concentration camps, but also against saturation bombing as well, against both. And we spread those letters among the people, and the Gestapo was after us, and the Jewish agents knew very well what went on in Frankfurt, and so then I was categorized that way. So we had here 300,000 German soldiers from the African Corps and 100,000 Italians from the African Corps. And from these, then they selected about 20,000 or so. And that was a wonderful wisdom, particularly of Mrs. Roosevelt, that maybe not all Germans or Italians had been fascists or so, and that one could re-educate them and could send them home, and they could help to change from fascism over back into liberalism again. And that I was in this program. And this program was initiated by the so-called Frankfurt School, which was in New York, and Mrs. Roosevelt worked with them, Mr. Roosevelt, and so they established that re-education program, which I went through in Norfolk, and then we were sent home to Germany, and I started there to a party, a Christian Democratic Party, and I studied at the same time, but I promised that I would use that education which I got here in order to transform a fascist state into a liberal state again. It goes overnight, by the way. You may think that this takes a long time. It took Hitler a few months to change a liberal state into a fascist state. You just have to change a few laws if it's prepared well psychologically. And then it's not so hard neither to get a fascist state into a socialist one, as it was in the German Democratic Republic in the East, or to put it into a liberal system, as it was in the German Federal Republic. So that is what I was engaged in. But our main concern here is the religious side and all that secular business. Somehow we separate that in our head. So when I show a movie to my students which has to do with Flint, then they think that is a totally secular thing. What does that have to do with religion? And when I talk about religion, they think, what does religion have to do with Flint or so? So the secular and the religious is completely separated from each other, in spite of the fact that both of them make no sense as far as when they are separate. So, but that is a problem in our thinking, so that we can take two opposites together. That is called dialectics. It's a strange academic word. We don't know it, or little of it, because in the Great Depression, we repressed it. We had high schools who were dialectical. My children's grandfather in New Haven, he learned all that. But then in the Great Depression, we were frightened to think in opposites because the system, economic system, was down and it was very unstable. So we wanted at least to the brains of the people to be stable and not to think in opposites. So if I have a student who wants to write a dissertation about the north side here, he can do that. But I will have a student who wants to write about the big, wonderful million-dollar houses on the other side, that's okay. But you cannot write a dissertation about both of them, how they are interconnected with each other, and why wealth on one side is inherited and the poverty on the other side, and why this is going on for 100 years or so. So it is very, very, to repress this type of newer thinking, newer logic, has been very costly for us in Vietnam, because we had Westmoreland on one side, who was a positivist, and then we had General Giap, who was a dialectician. And no matter how many bombs you have, we kill 2 million of them, it will not help. You will lose. And the same thing has happened to us now in Iraq, because the bad generals were fired us, and they were also from the Shukov school. They're also dialecticians. So then they suddenly disappear, and then somebody says, some of our politicians says, we won, we won, we won. He's not a liar. A few days later, you have the Tet Offensive. And then they disappear again. And you say, we won, McNamara was not a liar. We won, and then you suddenly have him in the capital. So the same thing, we go through this now again, because the bad generals have all joined the ISIS, I mean the younger ones and the grandsons or whatever. So, but we don't get it somehow. Out of a feeling of stability, we think you have to think of one side, and then you forget about it, and then you think about the other side. But the art is to think together. So that's what we want to do when we say the religious and the secular. They are opposites, but they are also interconnected. And you can see that in every culture war, every day, because every day you have a culture war. Gay marriage, or abortion, or birth control, or divorce, or stem cell research. There's no day where you have not a culture war. And how it is settled, well, that is, look how it is settled. For instance, Ireland has just voted for gay marriage. The Vatican said it was a great loss for humanity. There you have the whole thing, right? And so now with us, it got through, but the secular society is tolerant, so the priest does not have to assist a gay marriage. He cannot be put before court because he refuses. So, but does that really settle the question now? So we have a completely different thinking on the secular side, namely the human rights declarations, several ones, and so on, which says all human beings are first of all human beings, and then they are black and white and green and whatever. So first of all, they are equal and they have the same rights, therefore they have the right of marriage and so on, therefore we cannot deny it to the homosexuals. That is on one side, and it seems to be completely logical. On the other side, you have the book Leviticus, and you have the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, and you have the letter of St. Paul to the Romans, and you have the whole natural law tradition, which also this Pope, whom we want to talk about, has, like all the others. So therefore, I talk a little bit about this theoretical stuff because we have two opposites. They were not always opposite with each other, because there was a time when there was a difference between the religion and the secular, but no antagonism. And it happened only in the West and nowhere else. And now it has been globalized. And then Catholicism, of course, opposed this secularization. Protestantism was a very deeply religious movement, but at the same time was the first adaptation and adjustment to modernity. And so therefore you will see today that Catholic countries are not so capitalistic as Protestant countries are, and the Catholic, even Orthodox Catholic countries like Greece and so on, have the greatest problems and have to be pulled out by Protestant countries, because with them the capitalism has developed and evolved further. So nevertheless, this is an important thing that we see this issue. And back to just one thing which I wanted to tell you, because the Jewish thing is of course horrible. I just had my students, we went to the synagogue, to two synagogues here in town, and I take my students also to the mosques and to the churches, the Protestant, Catholic, and Buddhist temples and so on, because I don't think they should talk about things from outside, but they should listen to what the people themselves have to say, which is very different from what you find in the textbook very often, because religion moves and the Enlightenment moves, and the textbooks are always 20 years behind their time and always tell us the wrong stuff. The truth has a time core. It is not equal to all times all the time. So therefore that is important. So let me just tell you one story in order to see where I'm coming from. I'm still tell you where I'm coming from. I was in this gymnasium there, which is still there today, an elite school. I myself came from the working class on the Frankfurt West side, and my father was working, and my mother, they were working in a Jewish factory, shoe factory, and my father worked himself up to an engineer position, and but we were very much working class. So, but I had an uncle who was a judge, and this uncle, he got me into this bourgeois, that means this middle class high school, and I had a very hard time. I didn't know where the Nile River was. My parents always talked about sausages and so on, but not about the Nile River. The others had been at the Nile River, so I was at a great disadvantage. So, but one event, now I just want to concentrate on this, in all these 8 or 9 years there, and that one morning I lost my bicycle, lost the chain fell off. So I pushed it to that Lessing Gymnasium, that was the name. Lessing is a great enlightener. So we have religion, enlightenment. So nevertheless, I pushed it down, and there was before me an old lady with a black coat, and she carried 2 suitcases, but she carried them only a few steps, and then she stopped. So I came with my bike, and I was from the Catholic Youth Movement. I had learned to help people and to be good, so I wanted to do the good deed of my day. It was the good deed I wanted to do. So nevertheless, when I came around her, she had this huge Star of David on her black winter coat. So it was maybe April or so. It was still cold. And so that there were the Nuremberg laws, of course, had been passed. So I was not allowed to talk to her. She was not allowed to talk to me. But no matter what the bad past was of Catholicism and anti-Semitism, there was not a trace of anti-Semitism in my Catholic education. So to the opposite, I had learned that the Jewish brothers were suffering tremendously and unjustly. So I started talking to her, and she spoke the same Frankfurt dialect, which nobody speaks anymore in Frankfurt nowadays. It's dying out. So, and we were she looked like my grandmother. So, and I said if I could carry her suitcase, put on my bike, and so, and slowly she became more trusting, and she said, you know, a policeman came last night, and he told me I should pack everything what I can carry, and then I should take it to this Lessing High School, to the air shelter, and there we would be gathered, and then we would be transported to a nice village in the Eastern Europe, and there I could live out my life. She was maybe 75 or so, and she believed it, and I believed it. Now, we knew there were labor camps, and what should an old lady do in a labor camp? It should have come to us, see, but ethical decisions, religious decisions or whatever, they depend on the context, and how much do we know about the context? Absolutely nothing. So what I could do was, okay, she was to go to that shelter. So I put the suitcases on, and we rolled down. Now, for the context, it happened before the IG Farben building. You know Upjohn here. IG Farben was 100 times bigger than Upjohn, more than that. So a huge chemical complex in Europe. It's still there in France. So, in that building now, something happened. That means the fate of this woman was prepared in this building, because in this building was developed Cyclone B, with which she was probably gassed, like most of these labor camps. So, but did she know something about it? No, we knew that was the IG Farm building. Today, Humanities Center of the Frankfurt University. Before that, it was the government of the United States, the American zone government. So, nevertheless, just very shortly now, what one has to know, right? Right, knowledge, what is so important to act. So, this Cyclone B, that went back to a man who was called Fritz Haber. You have him on television sometimes, but very seldom. Fritz Haber was a Jew who took something out of the air, we don't have to go into chemistry, which increased the food supply of the human species, doubled it up. And that was before 1914. And that was a tremendous breakthrough, so that our Malthusian birth control stuff now and Malthus's theory are not valid anymore because of his discoveries. So, but that's a side. Now, all these people like Fritz Haber and Einstein and so on, they are always peaceful people when there are no wars. I mean, but when their countries get into war, they suddenly turn into nationalists. So Einstein and Fritz, they were very nice to each other, but then suddenly the war started, and they changed their mind. Fritz Haber. In 1915, in Ypres, in Belgium, the fronts got stuck. The Germans wanted to go, and this is the only way they could go, through the Seine Valley up in the north, and then move up to Paris and take Paris. But the First World War, they were stopped. So now Fritz Haber, like the atomic guy, said, we want to do something in order to save lives. They always save lives. So he saved lives, and he developed gas. And in Ypres, in August 1915, he weaponized the gas. And then they let it go when the wind was right, and 4,000 British and French soldiers were gassed to death. Fritz Haber went home. He was, in the meantime, a general in the German army. He celebrated his victory with his wife, took his revolver, and went into the backyard, mother of one child, and shot herself. The wife was also a chemist, but she was also a dialectician. She knew when one side does something, the other side does something as well. And she was right. So Fritz went back to the front, and the British invented the gas mask, so his gas didn't get through anymore. And then he had to increase the gas, and he produced mustard gas, which penetrated the gas masks, and so it escalates. That's dialectics. That's the military dialectics. There's no end to it. So, nevertheless, at the end of the war, there were 2 million people had died from gas. And Hitler was one who was wounded. He was blinded by British gas, and he was in the hospital in East Prussia, where then Jewish soldiers came and told him that the war had broken out and that the emperor had fled. And this moment he fell into a psychological episode, and he would never forget this for the rest of his life. So it strengthened his anti-Semitism tremendously. So that, as far as the story is concerned. Now, it's not yet finished. Fritz Haber, then, at the end of the war, was a war criminal. Now, at that time, there was no Nuremberg trial yet, because on both sides you had nobilities, and they were cousins. The British kings came from Hanover. So they were all cousins, also cousins with the Tsar in Moscow. And so, therefore, they would not put each other on trial. That's why there was no trial. But in the Second World War, the nobility had gone. And what was on one side here was the high bourgeoisie. What was in Russia was the working class. And Hitler was a petit bourgeois, a low bourgeois. All fascism is low bourgeois. And he got in between the two, and was then demolished in the middle there. So, nevertheless, that's why there was no trial that time. So international law evolved only after the First World War, and in a tremendous type of a development. So the Nuremberg trial and the Tokyo trial were internationally unbelievable accomplishments in as far as law is concerned. So, nevertheless, the Fritz Haber was now supposed to, the French and the British and the Americans wanted to have Fritz Haber. They wanted to try him, just privately or whatever. So, but he fled, and he went to Switzerland, and he let his beard grow, and he was not Fritz Haber anymore. But then the Norwegians wanted to give him the Nobel Peace Prize, but not for the gassing, but for the ammoniac taking out of the air, and for the increase of the food supply. And he went. He got the Nobel Peace Prize. And so when he came back from Germany, he was made the hero of the German parliament, and he started a new industry. The insects also had recognized that the food supply was increased, and therefore they increased. So one needed insecticides. And so he developed insecticides, and the different types and different cyclones. And cyclone B was the insecticide, which then by the Nazi government was found to be most practical, and then was applied. So that was the story around us. Did she know something? The Jewish lady? No, I didn't know anything. So we rolled down to this gymnasium, and the air shelter was full already. All the Frankfurt Jews had been selected. The rich Jews from the east side and the poor Jews from the west side, they were all put together. And so an SS-man came out with a list. I don't know her name even today, with a list. And so he looked at me. He was baffled. The SS was middle class. The SA was working class. So he had the same education which I had. So they were well educated. They burned down the Warsaw Ghetto, and then they played piano, Chopin, or whatever for the whole night. So that is the most horrible thing, that you have, highest developed culture, and it breaks down into utter barbarism. That is something what has to be very, very careful for. The Germans were not a stupid people. The Germans had a high culture, and it happened to them that they went into the basement of barbarism. So he shouted at me, and he said, "What are you doing? How can you, as an Aryan boy, help this Jewish pig to carry her suitcases?" And he shouted and screamed, and the windows were open, and everybody could hear it in the whole humanistic high school there. So I said, well, she didn't look like a pig. She looked like my grandmother. So he thought I was Jewish too, which, by the way, was not entirely untrue, because I searched later on, and I got to 1700, and there somebody slipped into the family. But it would not have worked at that time, because after the 7th generation, the Jewish gene was supposed to disappear from the genome, and it was more than 7 generations, so the idiocy has no limits. But nevertheless, he went to the director, and he said that I had to be eliminated from the school. What children are you educating who are carrying Jewish pigs' suitcases? And it went on, and that was the director, Silomon. By the way, I checked all this with my friends in Europe if I had some dates wrong or names, and it was all good as long as they can still remember themselves. But we helped each other in remembering, so it is quite true what I'm telling you. That's as true as it can be in history. So, and this fellow was also some kind of a noble fascist. He had written a book about the international language community, the Indo-Germanic language, which then became biological, and which then led to this fascist anthropology of the superiority of the Aryan race, and inferiority, not real inferiority of the Semitic race, but as far as the Jews were concerned, they were parasitic. They sucked out the blood of the European nations and so on. So then at that time, of course, when I walked her down and when all that happened, it was not really yet killing places. The people were not yet killed, because there was some time, when Hitler paid 25,000 marks for every Jew to go to Palestine. You had 2 weeks or a few weeks ago, you had Netanyahu in Berlin, who said that the Mufti of Jerusalem told Hitler to gas to burn the Jews, but Hitler didn't need the Mufti in order to burn the Jews. So, but the Mufti for Hitler had blue eyes, and he had blonde hair. So, and he had a mouse face, a face like a mouse, and he was intelligent. So therefore, he could not really be Semitic. He had to have Roman blood in him. That means Aryan blood. So therefore, he said, we have to be careful with this guy. He is smart. He is a Roman. He is not a Semite, an Arab, or whatever. So, but the German government behaved very well. Merkel, she said, we take full responsibility of the horror which has taken place, and we will not deculpate the former government. That means to take the guilt away from Hitler and put it on the Mufti and on the Arabs, which was the purpose. So you see how all this reaches into our press and into our newspapers, and you can see it on the screen. The question is only that we can do what is called the time diagnosis, that we can penetrate the appearances and can see what is behind them. So, okay, so, but let's work in order to see the atmosphere in which all that takes place. Also, you know that Pius XII has been attacked many times, that he did not stand up to fascism and so on. I tell you this also in order to show you the complications of all that, and that it is very easy afterwards to say you should have acted this way and this way. You see from the complication of this IG Farm building and what she knew, what I knew, and so on, how unbelievably difficult it is to know what your government is doing and what buttons you have to push and so on. So this Philemon, he was standing there, and the SS-man was shouting at him what kind of children he was educating, and he looked at me, and he was supposed to punish me. I was never punished, I must say, to the honor of this school. As a matter of fact, I came upstairs and I went one classroom. There was a priest teaching, according to the concordant. Priests could teach in the schools, and he read the book Genesis, and that God had created man and woman according to his image, and so on. And in the basement there were these people who produced those texts, and they were treated not exactly like the images of God. And there was another class where they read Plato in Greek and so on, about the beauty and the dignity of man and so on. And in the basement there happened this horror and so on, in the preparation of these camps there. And so at that time, then let me just finish that up. I saw this director there last time in Mannheim. They came out to the airfields and taught us Greek and Hebrew and all this. So when we attacked or defended the city, then we came back and then we had classes. We studied, Hebrew or Plato or whatever, and then we went up in the air again or whatever. So it was a very strange situation. But it was one day when then there was an American attack, and the American Air Force had the British two pathfinders, so they put smoke signals on all four corners of where they would bomb. And then the 1,500 or 2,000 would come and would throw all their stuff in there. So when you were in the side of that square, you were dead. You know that you would be dead. So I was laying beside Silemon, my director there, and the old man, he was pale and was so desperate. And, like young people are, I was not very respectful. And I said, where's Henry Ford now? Because Henry Ford, as you know, was a fascist, right? And he wrote 4 volumes about the international Jew. He was a good friend of Hitler. He got decorations in Berlin. They had the same economic problems, that means Keynesianism, and Hitler improved Keynesianism beyond Keynes even, and could therefore give 6 million, he said 7 all the time, let's put it down a little bit, so 6 million workers he gave work in 1 year. The Germans thought Messiah had appeared or so. So, that was some kind of an economic miracle. And then they both wanted to close Wall Street because they thought that productive capital, that means producing cars, was the only legitimate form, and that speculative capital, which they do in Wall Street, that this was Jewish and was bad and had to be stopped. If these two had lived, they would have given 2008 all the money to the car industry, but they would have nationalized the banks and closed Wall Street. So they had their own ideas, and there were people here. There was Father Coughlin here from town, the radio preacher, who was a fascist, who spoke from a radio station in Detroit then, the Little Flower, and for several years, and was a totally fascist program. Father Coughlin was a friend of Goebbels. Father Coughlin said if Goebbels, if they would stop this anti-Christian propaganda, people here would follow him gladly. So then Goebbels told Hitler. Hitler went into the parliament, the Diet, and he said, we have to change our propaganda to the United States. We stop that anti-Christian stuff and just have the pure fascism, and everybody will love us. So that was Father Coughlin, also a friend of Henry Ford. So the history about the state, it's very important to know. I think still that it is always better to know than not to know, even if it's painful what one knows, because then maybe one can still do something about it. Okay, so, but let me just say a last word about this, how this whole, where this woman then, where she went, and at that time it was not yet a death camp. I said so that the final solution of the Jewish question had other solutions before. And up to 1939, there were still Jewish children who were shipped out of Berlin to England and to Canada and so on. So there were, even in the end of the war, there were discussions between Hitler's SS and the Zionists. You know that here at the East Coast, German products were boycotted in 1933. Hitler made a transfer agreement with the Zionists that the German goods would be accepted, and Hitler would pay 25,000 marks for every Jew. There are Jewish friends here in town who were paid, and it went all to the kibbutzim, and then that is how Jewish Palestine was developed. So, but then how did this happen then, that this killing started, of which this woman didn't know and I didn't know? Hitler said 3 times. He said, if Jewish high finance, and that is Rothschild, who is now in Paris, if high finance will once more push the Aryan, the European nations into a fratricidal war, that will not be the end of Europe, it will be the end of the Jewish race. That moment came with Pearl Harbor. As soon as Pearl Harbor came, the European war had turned into a world war. The Jewish people were made responsible for the whole thing, and Hitler had to declare war against the States because of the Axis Treaty. That means Japan had been attacked. That sounds strange to every American. But the United States, according to the fascist theory, and see how important theory this is, had been strangled by the United States. That means Japan had become capitalistic, and capitalistic countries have to expand. You need always cheaper labor and cheaper resources, and therefore Japan expanded into China, but also into the Pacific, and therefore it looked to them as if the United States were pushing them back to the island, and therefore they felt attacked. So that Pearl Harbor was a counterattack against the American attack, and therefore Rome and Berlin declared war to the United States, which was an unbelievable senselessness, because they declared war to the 2 front runners, because the Slavic world and the American world had moved into the foreground in the First World War already, and Europe went into retirement, and in the last moment they tried to declare war to the front runners. So that suddenly Russian army and the American army met in Thuringia. So an unbelievable historical event. Hitler was a genius, and he could time very well. When somebody said Napoleon marched on the 1st of June to 1812 to Moscow, no, it was 1 day later. And then they could look it up in the library, and they knew all the things. So, but the overall timing was horrible. He wanted to do something what England had done in India, and what we had done in South America, and what the British and the Americans had done in the Near East and in Africa, colonization of the Russian territory up to the Ural. He wanted to do that 100 years, 200 years too late. You must never come too late in history, also not too early neither. And that timing, that needs education, and Hitler didn't have enough of it. So that is now when it started, Pearl Harbor. Then in Wannsee in Berlin, Heydrich and others met, and they made the secret decision. Secret. Hitler was not even present. Hitler's name is under no death certificate for the Jewish thing, for the Holocaust, or for the catastrophe, the Shoah. It's better, the word Shoah is better. So he was at the Eastern Front. His main thing was to kill communists. And why? The whole killing was, in theoretical terms, about one thing: equality. It's in our election now, right? Equality. That means the communism means equality. Hitler thought that the Christians and the Jews had introduced the thought of equality into the Roman Empire, and therefore the Roman Empire collapsed. The Bolsheviks whom he fought, and 27 million of which he killed, he thought were the heirs of Judaism and Christianity and of the prophets, and therefore were as dangerous for the human species as the Jews and the Christians were for the Roman Empire. They fought for humanity. That means if we don't have that law of the stronger and so on, the predator and the prey, then the human species will disappear. And I said it in my struggle already, and the earth will go around without us. So inequality is the issue. And equality has a religious background, and it is a Jewish background, and then Christianity has inherited it. Equality means classlessness. It means no slaveholders and slaves, no feudal lords and serfs, no capitalists and workers. That is the dangerous idea. That is the fear. That is why Pius XII made the Concordat with Hitler. That means they were afraid of communism. They did not necessarily like the fascists, Franco, Salazar, and so on, but not that Hitler was the only one who could conquer Bolshevism and rescue the human species. So all the mistakes which were made out of this fear. And my pastor, and I read a book about him, even in the when Hitler was already losing in Stalingrad, in Kursk and Berlin, he said Hitler is the only man who can rescue us from Bolshevism, in spite of the fact that the Gestapo had beaten him up in the Frankfurt, in their office, in the basement, and so on. So strong that is. That means the fear of communism, and the strange thing is, of course, that Jesus, his teaching is, of course, no rich man can enter the kingdom of God. If you do all the commandments, you still have to sell everything. The kingdom of God has no classes. And so this whole thing in the early church, as you know, they shared everything from everybody according to his ability to everybody according to his need. That's where Marx got it from. He got it from the Acts. Look at the Acts, there it is. And so it has been secularized. It's a secularization. So when Francis says, the communists are closet Christians, that's not only a joke. They are closet Christians. So, or if you see Bernie now, he's a Jew, and what is he fighting for? He doesn't even go to the mosque, but he has it in himself, as Marx had it in himself, as Freud had it in himself. So we have this strange opposition, and at the same time we have one in the other. So I just wanted to paint you a background from my personal life and where I'm coming from, in order to understand a little bit about the papal history now, and which leads us then to our Francis today. And so, have I made myself understood in a certain way? Do you have any questions? These may be strange things, but I'm happy to clarify things whenever you have anything. Yes. Mm-hmm.
I was very interested in your reasoning there about the communists, the Bolsheviks, because we always think that the Germans, Hitler, was getting back for what happened in World War I to Germany, and that was the main reason he became powerful. And I thought that was his philosophy.
See, and that is true. So you heard the truth, right? So on one side, Hitler attacked the West because of the Versailles Treaty and the injustices which had been done in his eyes to the German people, in the eyes of the whole army which had come back. So he had a lot of followers because of this. But on the other hand, it was a war, of thievery. Most wars are wars of thievery. They go back to private property, to ownership, right? So the attack against the East was not an attack of revenge, but it was, first of all, this to kill the Bolsheviks, but behind that there was, of course, to make it into a colony. So they had all kinds of plans. Where I go to Russia, I travel there. So on one side there was a road to St. Petersburg or Leningrad, and then there was another road which went to Moscow, and another road which went to Kiev, and so on. And there were branches between that, and there would be German farmer soldiers, and then there would be Slavs in between who would be the workers on the farms, and they would be fed well, and they would be put on birth control. They would reproduce themselves once, as we do here, 2 children each family, and so on. And it was all wonderful, organized in their mind already. So it was to rob them, right? So wars of thievery, which goes back 10,000 years to the introduction of the private property. We have to ask, why St. Francis, for instance, was so horrible about private property, and why the Pope now took that name, and he also has his economic criticisms and so on. And the issue is that 10,000 years ago, with agriculture, we developed private property. This is your field, this is my field, and then it got bigger in the villages, and then it got bigger in the towns and in the city-states, and then civil society developed between the family and the state, and more property, and so on, and then getting into the other city-states and steal their property, and so on. So that is why St. Francis and Marx and some other saints in between, and Thomas More here, there, it has the name, this place, why they all are so critical about this. When you go to the beach and somebody says, this is my beach, and then we have the public beach, and so on, it's exclusive. It's this exclusiveness of private property, and so on. It is a great problem. Should we go back when there was no property? That means the hunters and food gatherers. No, that is not. Nobody wants that, and this is not possible. So all what we have learned in between, but we have to do something about that poverty. That's what Bernie talks about, the billionaires and so on. That is a problem, but it's not so easy to solve it, and it needs also a lot of thinking, and generations of people have thought about. If you think about the kibbutzim system, in Israel, I was there, and but then you got Tel Aviv instead of the kibbutzim system. So, but we don't have to just to get a certain perspective about the whole thing. But the war, I mean, if you think of us, and it's painful to say this, but it was rubber, of course, in Vietnam, and it's coffee in El Salvador, and it is oil in Iraq. It is, I'm more for a multi-factor theory. There are probably other reasons too, but these economic reasons are there, right? So, and one cannot simply leave them out. And that brings us, of course, to our friend Francis I there, who somehow seems to be connected with that, but we need to take a few more steps. But is there anything else what you would like to ask? That was a wonderful question, and so if you have anything else, I'm glad before I move on. Let me then, in order to stay with this as much as possible, and you can take it home then, you see my website there, and you can see what we have done, what we have written, and so on. So that will fill you in, where I'm coming from. And then I have Dustin here, can shortly introduce himself. He is a great man. He has also written several books already, and he converted to Islam. So, and we have good connection. We are invited. We are supposed to go to Iran, where they would like to have our critical theory, and we will go to Dubrovnik together, where we for 40 years have a course on the future of religion, and we will then go to Rome, where we will give lectures on the critical theory of religion, and so on. So we were in Moscow together, so we have done a lot of things together already. He is the genius among the students. Okay, do you want to say anything else about
Oh my God, after that introduction? I might find out I'm not a genius. But yeah, so I'm Dustin Bird, and I grew up in South Haven, and not too far away from here. And I grew up in a Dutch Reformed tradition, actually. So I had a grandmother that used to tell me that, Dustin, if you're not working, you're sinning. So that's probably why I've written so many books already. And I was raised by a mother who was very much interested in social justice issues. She taught Head Start. I think people who are dedicated to educating kids, especially kids who are coming from poverty, you have to have a whole lot of sympathy and empathy for the plight, predicament of these people. And she passed that along to me by modeling what I thought was probably the best of the Christian tradition, in the sense that, she would, for no other than the goodness of her heart, because she loved people, she would bring them Christmas presents. She had a lot of kids that simply had no shoes, had no coats in the wintertime, and she didn't make a lot of money being a public school teacher, but nevertheless she she brought them all kinds of stuff. I had no idea what that meant, but I knew she was doing something good, and so I became very much interested in social justice issues at a very young age. But at the age of 9, I came home from church and I announced to my very Calvinist mother that I wanted to be a priest. And she almost fell over. But I had no idea what that meant, priest, minister, you know. So I was groomed within the church to become a minister. But then, of course, puberty happened, and then, you know, things like God and religion.
You never know what you're going to get.
No, it just goes out of the way, you know. And so it went away for a long time, my interest in religion and whatnot, as I was skateboarding and chasing young women. But when I was in high school, I was very much interested in a young lady named Amy Kanega. And so I started to court her, but she told me, very interesting fact, she told me that she would not date an idiot. And that I had to read a little bit to become a little bit smart, you know, and before she would date me. So the first book she gave me was the autobiography of Malcolm X. And so as a junior in high school, I read the autobiography, and that again brought back the interest in social justice. And in my junior year in high school, I converted to Islam. Now, in the meantime, my mom had no idea what that meant. So, and she said, "What did that mean?" I said, "Well, it means finally, Mom, I'll be a good son." You know what I mean? And I have to be, you know. And so I was, you know, I studied, and I came here to Western as an undergrad, and I visited this Kalamazoo Islamic Center, which is just down here. So if you've never visited there, by the way, you can always go for a visit. I bring students there all the time and whatnot. The imam down there is Noman Hafez from Pakistan. Very, very nice guy, very loving and pious man. So I remember the first time as a freshman here in 1994, I went into the mosque and I saw these empty bookshelves right when you walk in the front door. And I said, "This is strange. These bookshelves have no books on them, you know. I thought these were people who studied all the time, you know. That's all that I learned about. And there was no books on them." Then I later found out those were for shoes, because when you walk into a mosque, you have to put your shoes on there. You can't put the shoes into the mosque. So I walked in, and the lights were all off, and I said, "Hello, hello, anyone here, anyone here?" And a man popped around the corner, his head, and he said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "I think so. I came to see the mosque." And he said, "Are you Muslim?" I said, "Yeah, I think I am." And he said, "Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh." And they get a big hug, you know, "Peace be with you, brother," and big hug. "Come on in, I cook you some meals." And he cooked squid, which was weird. I've never eaten it, but nevertheless. And so that was my journey into that trajectory. But I became very much interested in philosophy. So my PhD is in philosophy, and especially philosophy of religion. I became interested in philosophy when I started to study with Rudy in 1994 as well. And so that put me on these two different very tracks, the religious side, which was more geared towards Islam, and then later a much more ecumenical orientation in my religious background, but then also philosophy. And somehow I've brought them together in my own life. I try to constantly engage in some kind of critical thinking about everything that's going on. I try to impart that to my students, but also to understand what's very important about the different religious traditions, that they all share, as the Pope would say, this common humanity and the common concern about where we're heading and where we're going as human beings. And so I've been able to see the Pope now 3 times in the last 3 years, and I've taken students to Rome and to see the Pope and to go to Mass at St. Peter's. And I visit when I'm there my good Franciscan monk professor friend who takes me to the monastery, and Barrett and I visit the monastery in Three Rivers, the Anglican monastery. We're neighbors, by the way, so it's kind of interesting, you know.
It's an interesting street.
It is a very interesting street with retired priests and a ufologist there and a church organist and all kinds of interesting things going on the street. So, but that's where I'm at. So I'm finishing up my my PhD at Michigan State right now in the philosophy department, and I'm tenured at Olivet College and also actually a visiting professor at Michigan State right now in religion and philosophy. So.
Very good. And he is writing a book, has written a book about Malcolm X, which is coming out in June, right?
Yeah, the latest book comes out in June. I found out today. It's coming out in on Brill in Holland. And so it'll be in English everywhere, but it goes throughout the world. But the publisher is there, and I've written a book against Ayn Rand, which I don't know if any of you know.
One.
Yeah, you like that?
Oh, I expect it.
Ayn Rand was one of those. She's a libertarian philosopher who thinks that religion is pure evil, that altruism is evil, and that especially Catholics. So she has certain really ugly language for Catholics. So I wrote.
Yeah, who likes to claim her?
Yeah, I don't know who claims her. You know.
Oh, we know who claims her.
Paul Ryan claims her, actually. Paul Ryan, who was Speaker of the House, claims her. He says he's a good Catholic and a Randian. Of course, the bishops of the U.S. Came out and said what you do in Washington, D.C. with your budgets will not have nothing to do with the gospel of Christ, has everything to do with Ayn Rand, and they told him to cease and desist speaking as if he was speaking for the church. He is speaking for Ayn Rand and not the church. And those were the U.S. Council of Catholic Bishops, so they're very conservative to go after Paul Ryan. So that was my second book, and my first book was about the Iranian Revolution with Ayatollah Khomeini, since it's one of the things I think most Americans know very little about. We have, unfortunately, a caricature idea of what is going on in Iran and with the Iranians, and unfortunately, not much of it's true. So that was the first book I wrote, but in the meantime, I've written my fourth book, and that's about Islam in Europe, before all the immigrants started flying in this past year. So now that it's with New York with a publisher right now, and I am currently starting my research on a book about Pope Francis and Muslims, because one of the very interesting things that he's been doing is he's been very open for Muslims. He's traveled to Muslim countries, gone to mosques, prays with the imams. He is asking every Catholic parish in Europe to take in a Muslim family from Syria, not only to house them, but to walk with them, he says. And so that ecumenical spirit of ecumenicism, I think, is strongest with him that I've ever seen in my studies of Catholicism. He really is attempting in many ways to embody the values of Vatican II in what it says about Muslims as being brothers and sisters in faith. And so I'm currently doing that work right now. So.
Okay, now we have another great hero, and that is Barrett, who is a Presbyterian minister in the north side, on the other side of the railroad station.
Yes, the wrong side of the tracks, as it were.
Didn't say the wrong one.
as some would say.
Yes.
I am Barrett Lee. I'm the pastor of North Presbyterian Church here in Kalamazoo, and have been in this position for about 2.5 years. But I came here from upstate New York in the Utica, Rome area, and what drew me here was this particular job. North is a very, very unique church. We are a special mission of the Presbytery of Lake Michigan, and in Presbyterian terms, a presbytery is our equivalent of Roman Catholic diocese, roughly the same size and same place within the power structure, if it could be comparable. But North's special mission is to practice our ministry alongside people who live with severe mental illness. And so about 80 to 90% of our parishioners are people who live in group homes, single-room occupancies, people who receive case management services, some of whom are able to live independently, very few of whom are able to hold any kind of stable full-time job, and unable to live up to that very capitalistic American ideal of, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 work. They are people who, by the American standards, are not very productive, but are indeed very spiritually fruitful. And that's one of the really fun things I was going to work with people who live with cognitive disabilities is you learn there's a big difference between fruitfulness and productivity, and I don't think the broader culture we live in sees that to bear fruit you must be productive. I think that Reformed heritage, which the Presbyterians lay claim to, we're trying to be a bit subversive.
I know this one, yeah.
Yes, But that difference. And so, but it's an amazing ministry that we get to participate in. People try to say sometimes, oh, you're the church that ministers to mentally ill people, and we're very quick to stop that and say, wait, no, we do ministry with mentally ill people. And there's a big difference between ministry to and ministry with, we're discovering. A lot of the philosophical framework for this ministry has been shaped by a Roman Catholic source. Is anyone familiar with the L'Arche movement? Jean Vanier or Father Henry Nouwen. Henry Nouwen is the more prolific writer. His books like The Wounded Healer and With Open Hands, Reaching Out. He's written quite a bit on that. Well, the L'Arche movement is a residential community of a Christian residential community started by a man named Jean Vanier of people living with people who have severe mental illness or developmental disabilities, and people living together as partners, some of whom need more help than others, but everyone comes together with a gift. Every one of us has an inner gift and an inner poverty that we bring to a relationship. And Jean Vanier, he just recently addressed the global meeting of Anglican primates in England just a few weeks ago. His work is absolutely amazing. If you were to start with one place, I would recommend his book, Becoming Human. And Vanier is French, it's spelled V-A-N-I-E-R. And then Henry Nouwen as well. His book, The Wounded Healer, is probably his most famous. But Nouwen was the pastor at the Toronto L'Arche community called L'Arche Daybreak for the last 10 years of his life. And he had become a very successful Harvard academic, and then at one point walked away from it to become the pastor at a community of very profoundly disabled people. And how that connects with our ministry at North is that North adopts a very similar ministry philosophy. The difference is not only that they're Catholic and we are Protestant, but also that we apply that philosophy in the context of a parish, whereas the L'Arche communities apply it within the context of a residential community, which we are not set up to pursue at this time, although it's nice to dream. It's some really fantastic and amazing work that we get to do at North. The mental illness is the crux of our calling. We've received national recognition for this. We are founding members of the Presbyterian Serious Mental Illness Network, which is a ministry of our national denomination, the Presbyterian Church USA. We have received awards from the General Assembly of that body, the Florence Iverson Craft Award given to congregations that pioneer new models of ministry alongside people who live with mental illness. We've been written up in seminary textbooks, and the most recent thing that we're most proud of is if anyone is a fan or a reader of Sojourners magazine, we are going to be featured in their May issue this coming year. Yes, I didn't tell you about this. But we need to catch up and have a drink.
Yeah.
Well, yes, I was interviewed by Sojourners, and we're going to be written up in their May issue, and it's really exciting to get to be a voice among churches for people who live with mental illness. And I think that it's very timely for this period in which we live, when the only time in American culture when we seem to want to talk about mental illness is in the immediate aftermath of a mass shooting, which creates all sort of untrue preconceived notions about what mental illness is, or how people live, or what are the things to be aware of. But since we are unfortunately in the midst of an epidemic of mass shootings, it means that mental illness is coming up a lot, and so we're sort of seeing this in our ministry as a prime opportunity to talk about what mental illness really is, and what people who live with mental illness really are like. A little bit more on my angle here, and what drew me to want to be a part of this. As Justin mentioned, we're neighbors and have become good friends, and through him I've gotten to know you, Dr. Siebert. It's been a privilege, and our our Saturday conversations are a delight.
We have a free luncheon every Saturday in Colonial Kitchen. You're all invited.
All right, delicious. And but yes, and one of the things that drives me as a Presbyterian, you know, the last 50 years, we've seen a tremendous opening of the Catholic Church to the world, and the emblematic event of this was, of course, the Second Vatican Council, and one of the things that I think Francis is so powerfully doing is he is embodying the principles of the council in such a unique way, in a way that has not yet been done. Like the groundwork was laid half a century ago, and Pope Francis is now saying, all right, let's live it. And that's got a lot of folks over on the Protestant side really excited, because in the 50 years since then, there has been a similar movement among Protestants. In my own Presbyterian tradition, we have a document called the Confession of 1967, the theme of which is reconciliation, and this becomes the central lens on the gospel and the world, is the theme of reconciliation. And it was drafted specifically as an ecumenical response to the movement of the Second Vatican Council, to say there is after centuries of animosity and hostility between Presbyterians and Roman Catholics, suddenly there was an opening on the Roman Catholic side, and the Presbyterian Church said, let's respond in kind. And then these last 50 years, there's been a growing movement to recover our Reformed Catholic heritage.
Well, it's 500 in 2017. It's 500-year anniversary of Luther and his
the 95
the 95
Theses.
Theses. So maybe it's a good year for reconciliation.
I think it is. Yeah, and so here we are, 500 years after the Reformation, and the last 50 years has been this tremendous opening on both sides, and just as there's an opening to Protestant ideas, you know, now we are no longer the heretics, we are the separated brethren, according to the language of the council. And here on our side, this has been a tremendous ecumenical interest for me, is for us as Presbyterians, as Protestants, to recover our Catholic heritage, that perhaps in the pendulum swing of the Reformation, a baby went out with the bathwater, and perhaps that baby was the infant Jesus. But we have an opportunity to recover the joy of this in the places where we're able to stand on common ground together as Christians in the world, as people of faith in the world. I found tremendous resources within my own Reformed Protestant tradition, which I hope to talk about as we get into Francis as a reformer. I'm particularly inspired by a school of thought known as the Mercersburg theology, which is the closest that the Reformed tradition has to a Catholic revival, although it is becoming more and more common as we recover our sacramental and liturgical traditions. One of our joys at North is, in my 2 years since I've been there, we have instated the weekly celebration of the Eucharist, which is still something that's of a rarity among Presbyterians, but it's becoming more common, and you know, making use of liturgical vestments and gestures, things that look and feel very Catholic, but we're able to honestly look at our traditions and say, no, there's a place for this within Reformed Protestant Christianity as well. There's a common ground we stand on that we can grow and learn and shape each other, and it's a beautiful thing. And as the Catholic poet and novelist Flannery O'Connor said, all that rises must converge. And I think in these last several decades, as we've seen both of our denominations rising, we've seen them also converging. And for that, I am profoundly thankful. And I'm very thankful to be invited here tonight. Thank you, Dr. Siebert.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and then this morning they announced that Pope Francis is going to visit in Cuba with the Russian.
Yes, Patriarch Kirill.
What is the title?
The Patriarch of Moscow.
Yeah. In Cuba?
Yes.
They meet in Cuba.
Yeah.
Oh, very good.
On his way to the U.S., he's stopping in Cuba.
Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful.
Mexico, sorry.
Yeah,
Right.
let's always stay in contact with what's happening now, right? So for the next time. Okay, would you like to stand up a little bit or rest a little bit? Yes. Okay, you worked so hard. Now let's just have 5 minutes and stand up a little bit. We can do some gymnastics.
We have a half hour, and how much of that do you want to show?
20 minutes or so.
20 minutes?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
rest, or, rest for a little bit,
Yeah.
5 minutes, then we turn it on.
Yeah, right, yeah. Do you think we can do something?
Once removed. But between us, the president from 2012 to retire. Yep. Wonderful people. Like that donation that Malcolm was originating from. That's really more political. They have actually very different with time, and they've appropriated some of the words. Yeah, that area. For the most part, they have very little to do with Islam, and that was one of the reasons why Malcolm left.
Thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
teaching this and agreeing to teach this.
Yeah, I'm happy to.
I
Yes.
had classes from you in the early 70s.
Oh, really? Oh, my God, yes.
Religion and social ethics.
Really? See, I'm
During
still
the
teaching it.
Vietnam War.
Yeah, oh, my God. That was an opportunity.
It was. It certainly was.
Yeah. I'm still teaching it online now.
Oh, great.
Tonight I
Great.
just wrote to them.
Maybe
Yeah.
I should take it. Because now I'm old enough to take one class for free.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Good.
And also when I was a graduate student, you and I were walking from, I don't know, from the Union to your office.
Yeah.
And we were chatting, and I said that my great aunt had recently passed away, and my mother, you asked me how I could
Yeah.
pay for graduate school.
Yeah.
And I said my mother inherited money and gave it to me for graduate school. And he said, oh, what a smart mother.
That's true. See, it's still
See?
true.
And I still
Yeah.
remember that you said it, and she
Yeah.
loved that you said it. My
Yeah.
mother loved it.
Yes, yeah. Well, it was true, and it's still true.
Yes, it is.
Yes,
it is.
wonderful. Yeah.
So I'm so appreciative that you're here doing this.
Right.
Yeah,
So we
I am.
will meet several times
Yes.
with each other.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a wonderful opportunity.
I had you in 1978.
Really? Oh my God.
5 years after me.
Yeah. Which classes were you in?
I was in what's a comparative
The religion
religion.
department, yeah.
It was comparing the American institution to religion, the symbols of the flag, and
Oh yeah. Okay.
it's a long time ago. I don't remember all of it. I just
Yeah.
it was
Okay. Wonderful.
the American religion, something
Yeah.
different than
Yeah.
real religion.
And look at this, after all these years, we're back.
Yeah.
51 years I'm here. Just think about
Yeah.
That's a long time.
it. Yeah. I think in March the Board of Trustees will celebrate.
Oh, really?
Yes.
What are they going to do?
I think I have no idea.
You're going to get a plaque?
Maybe I get a horse. The Bronco
A Bronco?
horse.
A Bronco horse.
And I have to
Gold.
sing the
Just wanna
Bronco
go.
song.
Oh, do you know it?
No.
I know, that's a problem,
Peter
right?
Hennecke wanted to teach me, but he failed. He failed miserably.
Sorry, he was German.
That's funny. I was once involved in hosting a group of Latinos who came here to study evaluation, and they gathered around the big Bronco down by the field
Yeah.
house, and they said, Eileen, come here. Come here. I said, what? This is not a Bronco. This is a Bronca.
Really?
No penis.
Oh my God.
I'm like, this is what's important to you.
Yeah. You know, there were 3 horses. They got it from California,
Mm.
but they were too expensive, all 3 of them, so they took one. Yeah.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
Well, thank you again.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Yeah, I'm happy to do it. I'm glad. Glad to see you all again.
No, right?
That's great.
Grew up.
There's no plans for that right now.
Ruby,
Yes.
you're not meeting Saturday then?
No, not this time.
Yeah, I was wondering.
You are free on Saturday.
Yes.
What will you eat?
I don't know.
Good that you could come tonight. That's wonderful.
You made it, Walter.
Yes, thanks
Yeah.
to, thanks to you.
It was icy out there, right?
Mm-hmm. It's getting icy.
Yeah. I hope nobody will fall there.
I wait and students who show up, Walter.
Just stand up a little bit, too. Walter, thank you for this, what you bring me there all the time.
I had
The articles, I used the whole article on Habermas and Benjamin.
Yeah, right.
Oh, I forgot to bring something tonight.
Well, bring it next Saturday.
Yeah, I'll bring it next Saturday, but I think you'll get what I have.
Yeah, okay, but I used a lot of it. It's wonderful. For the invitations, too.
He doesn't work, he reads and writes. My daughter is a collector.
Oh, tomorrow my architect comes. My architect comes tomorrow. I want to broaden the kitchen tomorrow. That's why I cannot come. The architect comes to my house.
Oh, your
and we
house.
want to change the kitchen. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine.
Good. Wonderful.
I'm also an emerita from Western
Oh, what is
in
it?
speech pathology.
Speech pathology. Oh, that's famous. When I came
Dan
here-
Riper
Yeah, right.
hired me.
Oh, really? He was a famous fellow, right?
Yes, he
He
was.
did wonderful things.
Yes.
He was there when I was hired. He was here already when I was
Yes.
hired. Yeah.
Well, you've only got a year on me.
Really?
I was born in 29.
Really? 27. I was born, so 2 years.
Okay, that's 2 years.
Yeah, right. Well, see, we are here.
We're
Oh.
here. Hip, hip, hooray.
Exactly. Yeah. So you are organizing the whole thing? Or?
No.
So no lunch tomorrow.
I have been active with the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute from the beginning, and I'm on the
Who
curriculum.
was that person? Osher,
Osher,
founder.
we founded it here at Western. I was on the Emerita Council,
Yeah.
and Ruth Heinig and Carrie Williams and Ron Kroll were very instrumental in getting this lifelong learning
Yeah, that's
started.
a wonderful
And we
idea.
had to qualify by having a certain number of memberships, and Osher has supports several of these programs throughout the country, and they were not approving any, we had heard, but they were so impressed with our growth that they gave $1 million grant for our program.
What family? Who was this Osher family?
I don't know where they're
Did
from.
they give a donation for this?
Yeah, they have set up this foundation
Oh, yeah.
to help fund lifelong learning.
Yeah.
And us old people need to continue. No, he's not from here. However, one of the people on his executive council was Michael Gary's daughter of the Gary Center. And I think she was instrumental in our getting this
Rudy, do you have
approval.
another copy?
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah.
All right,
There's
thank you
one.
so much.
You're welcome. You can take more if you want to.
There are quite a few people who aren't here tonight.
It was too cold.
I don't
It was too
know.
icy.
Wasn't it a perfect night?
I wonder if we could get some more tables. We have enough chairs.
Yeah.
But
Well, I go
you
to
know,
church on Sunday. I can tell them.
Okay.
That's my church.
Okay, Father Ken.
Yeah, Father Ken, yeah. Sister Pam, so I tell them that if we need some...
I think probably we have about 6 people who did not come tonight who are signed up to come.
Okay, so I keep all that and give it to them next time.
Okay, that would be great.
Very good, wonderful.
Ken was a classmate of one of my sons.
Oh, really?
In Portage,
Yeah, he's from here. He's a good fellow.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah. Good, wonderful. Okay, can we start again with the last energy which we still have?
Okay, we're ready to go again. Thank you for getting back in a timely fashion.
Okay, now you know where we are coming from, right? I think we made it perfectly clear. You also know that I'm the only one who is in community with the Pope. These two there, they will be someday. But I'm there already. And I have always been there. Okay, so...
Ask him to work on the celibacy thing and then get me a job.
Yeah, I'm working on it, yes. I'm working hard. Right, exactly. Okay, now what we saw from the stories and so on, we heard here that there is, of course, communication with between the different Christian groups and then between the different world religions and so on. But one thing which we have to see in order to understand the popes, let's see from Pius XII. I mentioned I grew up under him, and he was always said he loved the Germans and so on, but later on he may have loved them too much in the process. So that is part of the criticism nowadays. But the real problem between the religions and the church and the different Abrahamic religions and the papacy and the Roman system, in order to understand them, is that we need some kind of a model. You know that scientists and so on, they're all working with some kind of a model. We are overcome by information, also about the Pope. We have a lot. Look at this Time, and his paper is everywhere, and the journalists, they are happy, and they say all kinds of right and wrong things and so on. But when we are flooded by everywhere, flooded by information and also by experiences, so we may not be able to get to what is really what counts there. That means we need some kind of concepts or some kind of a model in order to make the right cuts so that we can really understand what these popes are about and what the difference is between this Pius XII and this John the 23rd and this Paul VI and this John Paul III and so on and so on. What kind of policies they had and to characterize them, and also to do judgment in a certain sense. Right? We cannot really live without some kind of a value judgment. So Pius XII, they want to make him a saint, and there is great problems. They refused, they rejected it. The canonization process did not come through. So what is the reason? Can we there pass some kind of a judgment? Bernie said, Clinton has all this experience, but what is needed is judgment, and he was right. Therefore, how do we judge this? But first of all, in what kind of attention do these popes stand, so that we understand them somehow from inside? And there, I started already to say that there is this antagonism between the religious and the secular, and that it has happened with us since the Renaissance. So our culture wars here are not from yesterday or so, right? Or we have them or whatever. This is going on for a long time. And I said that it was only in the West that this happens, and now it has hit the Near East and the Far East and so on. And it's important that we get to that substance of the whole thing, and that we are not distracted back and forth. And my students have the feeling we're going cycles all the time, and everybody online tonight again, I'm so confused how we get out of the confusion. the masses of information about the Pope or so can be very confusing. There are good guys who say he's a good guy, the others say he's a horrible guy, he's a communist, and so on. So how do we find our way through that jungle? And that is only possible if we have some 1, 2, 3 or whatever concepts by which we can sort out things a little bit. So we have you have 3 or whatever. We don't want to go. When we say something historical, we do it only in order to say something about now. To say something about now is the most difficult thing. It's much easier to say something about the past, but to grasp what our situation is, like with the Jewish woman there, this particular situation there, see, that is what is so hard to penetrate. Later on, you maybe can penetrate it, but you need it then because you have to act. We have to act now. See, we have to vote, and so on. So we have to break through. How can we do this? So this word antagonism, and that's why I mentioned something about that method, this dialectical method, because that has to do with thinking in contradictions and in opposites and so on. So, but what has happened with this, it came from the Christian community, the whole split. That is something. It didn't come from the Buddhists. It didn't come from the Muslims. I had His Eminence, the Ayatollah, in my house for a whole day and so on. He said, we are reasonable people. Reason is the presupposition of Islam, and reason is the consequence of Islam, and so on. But he had the wrong reason. That is the problem. That means the modern reason is another one than the reason of Averroes, a great partner or antagonist of Thomas of Aquinas, and so on. So the reason which we talk about today is very, very different. And just think of that, what an enlightener says about the angel. The enlightener has no angel. And there was Angel Gabriel, and he talked to Muhammad, and there was the angel Gabriel, and he talked to Mary, and they are the enlighteners, and they have no angels. And there were miracles, and there was Joshua marching over the Jordan River to the east, and so on. And the water stood still. The water of the Jordan stood still, a miracle. There is no miracle for enlightened people. They are disenchanted people. So therefore you have this antagonism there very clearly. And it's with us as Americans, our state is secular. We don't even have the name of God in the Constitution. And we have the name of God in the Declaration of Independence, but it's the deistic God. It's not the God of Muhammad. It's not the God of Abraham. So that is, we are, on one side, we have the secularity. We have a constitution which comes from the encyclopedists in France and so on. So on the other side, in civil society, we have many communities of pious, wonderful people who read the Bible and so on, the so-called evangelicals. And with the evangelicals, you have Catholics combined. They just, in Iowa, they did something again. They can become powerful politically and so on. So, and then you have the doctor, the brain surgeon and so on, who knows that evolution, of course, is in all sciences accepted, and suddenly he rejects the evolutionary theory as a brain surgeon in order to get the evangelicals and so on. So this is a struggle which is unbelievable going on, and we cannot say that is personal dishonesty or whatever. It's really a split which is somewhat objective, and it is before us, and it's in us, and it's beyond us, and we have to deal with it. And it came out of the Christian community itself, long before Pius XII, or the 19th century or whatever. How did it happen? It happened that some of us started to learn. That may sound funny, but after 1,000 years of scholasticism, that means, to make all kinds of acrobatics in the brain and so on, they used this sharpening of the brain and applied it to nature suddenly, and they applied it to man, and suddenly they found out things which the others didn't know, which even the priests didn't know, and so on. So there you have Galileo, he was a Catholic. You have Darwin, who studied for the ministry. He wanted to become a country pastor in somewhere north of London or whatever. They were all Christians, they were all believers. And it is Christianity, therefore we have to take full responsibility for it, because our Muslim brothers didn't do it, Jewish brothers didn't do it, we did it. So it happened in the church, and some of them suddenly did these discussions, Copernicus, and then Galileo, and so on, and then Darwin, and so on. You could say today, you know, if we had dealt with it, if the popes had functioned better, that would not have happened. Maybe the split in the Christian community, where some of them went on with the old traditions and the New Testament, and they didn't read it very often, but nevertheless, whatever they had in the tradition. But then the others now, maybe the popes and the Inquisition and so on, did not deal with them. Look at this Galileo case. He was 70 years old, Galileo. He was an old guy, good old guy, and smart, and he had discovered that. What did he discover? Well, something very simple. That stuff there looks as if it stands still, but it moves there. And we still go to the Lake Michigan and say, honey, look how beautiful the sun rises. Of course it doesn't rise, but what should I say? Honey, look how beautiful the earth turns. I mean, this is completely unpoetical. I mean, since 400 years we know it's not true, and we still go on. We know science reveals continually that how things appear is not how they are. It's always the opposite. So it is. So therefore, the old man now, he says, you know, and he taught the same thing what Copernicus had taught 70 years earlier, and the Pope certainly earlier said, okay, it turns, so let it turn. And so Copernicus was okay, but 70 years later, what had happened? Why did now Galileo teach the same thing, and it was suddenly wrong? The Reformation had happened. That means the church had split. And it went out of, it is not that Luther wanted all that. Father Luther would have been a saint if he hadn't been a heretic. But he had saint material in him, an unbelievable struggle about one question, justification. How am I justified? And he struggled, and he thought the devil was after him, and so on. So even when he, still in effort, when he translated the Bible, he took an ink pot and threw it against the wall because the devil had been there again, and so on. So, and during prayer, he was an eremite, an Augustinian eremite. So he was in the choir when they were singing. He threw himself on the altar and said, "It's not me. It's not me. It's not. I'm not Satan," and so on. He went to confession to Father Staupitz every week. On Sunday he went, and then on Monday again. And Staupitz said, "Martin, this doesn't go on. You don't go to confession anymore. Go to Rome instead." So he went to Rome. And it is not true that he was bothered by Alexander VI, which you see in the movies, and his daughters and sons and whatever, and the crimes which they did in order to unite Italy and so on. That he didn't see all that. That was not it. It was the question of justification. And when he came home and from Erfurt, went to Wittenberg, and they had taken all the pictures out of the churches in Wittenberg, he thought it was utter barbarism, and he was furious about all what had happened to these churches. So, nevertheless, so the Galileo. Now, we have to see, I say this because the German Pope, the Benedict XVI, you know, after John the 23rd had said that the Inquisition may have been wrong, he, the unhappy character, said that the Inquisition was right, and the university in Rome threw him out, and he was not able to talk to them. And so there you see, this is what happens in the papacy, and these mistakes, they are horrifying. In the end, the old man had to resign, you know. He couldn't go on anymore. But that's another tragedy. So, but there is the Inquisition monks, younger than Galileo. He wanted them. They forced him to rescind. They showed him the waterboarding there. By the way, the waterboarding comes from the Holy Inquisition, then went to the Nazis, and then to the CIA. This is not a very good heritage there which we have, and we should get rid of it. So he then rescinded, but he murmured in his beard that it turned anyway. And his daughter then, the book which he had written, brought it to Holland, and Holland was a very enlightened, progressive country, and it was printed anyway. You cannot repress things, right? So, and I say this because it hasn't stopped to be repressed, because they were all the pious popes in the 19th century, and then comes this Benedict again, who tries a last frontal attack against modernity and just collapsed under it. The bishop here said we had a little controversy. He said, well, he was old. There were so many old popes who did not resign. As a matter of fact, they were all old and nobody resigned. Why did this guy resign? Well, he had problems. He had more problems than anybody else. He tried something again which had been tried, and we must not try it again. So then, of course, Galileo was arrogant. These people who in the community who now learned, they became elitist, they became arrogant, and he said, "You are children." So that's what he said. He said to the inquisitors who had all the power not to kill him. The state killed him, would have killed him. The church didn't kill the state; they had the state to kill him. So nevertheless, he said he said to the inquisitors, "You are children. You are stupid. Sit on your ass, look through the microscope, and develop mathematical formulas." Well, you cannot say this to somebody who has power. You have to be more diplomatic. So then they showed him again the waterboarding thing. So maybe it could have been done in another thing. And the only way out in these things, in these antagonisms, is that we keep the discourse open. So when we say to the other one, now in the struggles which we have now, and the doctors say, look, these bishops, they think that God puts a little soul into the embryo in the first moment, ha, 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 ha. And then the bishops say, you naturalists, you killed the last morality which is still in people and so on. Now, when you say this back and forth, then you don't get anywhere. But there will be no solution. The only way out is that we honestly say, what do these popes say? What do these religious people say? What is their argumentation when they are against birth control and so on? How do they argue? They are not stupid. Dogs don't have religion, so religious people do have a brain. They have reason. Otherwise, they couldn't have religion. So therefore, you have to trace their argumentation. And the same thing you have to do with the Enlightenment people. How did this come about that our state is secular? There was a good reason. They were not bad people, Hamilton or whatever. They were all good, honest people. The bourgeoisie had to secularize the state, because if they had not taken religion out of the state, we would not have ended with any civil war. We killed each other from 1816 to 1848. The whole Europe every village was destroyed in Europe. So say ISIS. We also cut heads off all over the place in the 16th century, in the 17th century. And if they had not secularized the state and religion as we did here, we had a state church, the Anglican Church. It was taken out of the state and was put into civil society, and that was the only way to stop the civil wars. So, therefore, that was not a good discourse model which Galileo had with the inquisitors. If he had done it right, he should have understood that in the meantime the Reformation had happened. The church became schizophrenic. It became neurotic, because of the threat from inside. The monk had done this, and then comes the lawyer in Geneva, and so on, and then comes Zwingli, and so on. So it goes all over the place. And of course, it had been there for 100 years already. These spiritual revolutions have an incubation time. So therefore, there was in England already Wycliffe, and there was in Bohemia already Hus. They were all Luthers already. They were predecessors of Luther. It was also revolutions, as far as our country is concerned. Bernie talks about revolution. Revolutions have an incubation time. The class antagonism gets deeper and deeper, and suddenly a little light thrown into it, a little fire, and the whole thing blows up. So one has to catch these things before they blow up, and they can't be seen when they blow up. The man to whom this church is dedicated, Thomas More, and so on, he was the chancellor of Charles the Eighth, of Henry the Eighth. So he is a saint now, but he has killed Wycliffe people, and we don't even know the number. He has burned them alive. So we have to see those things, and we have to regret them, and we have to repent them. If we belong to these communities, we have to repent that what has been done. And then he, of course, was decapitated himself. His head was taken off and so on. But, yes? It's 8:30. We have to close then. Okay, very good. So let me just sum that up and close, because we want to be punctual. We didn't get to our movies. We want to show some movies about the Pope there at the end, and we missed it. So, but just the model now. Inside of the Christian community, this antagonism came about, that both sides are hostile. It reaches into our present. The popes had to struggle with it. This pope has to struggle with it too. How he will struggle with it, that is what we have to come to a judgment to. If it is adequate to this, if it will make a difference. Symbolism is nice, and it's very important, and to wash feet and to kiss sick people and so on. These are all wonderful gestures, and the Roman Catholic Church is great in symbolism. And symbolism is one element of religion, but there is a cognitive side and there is an ethical side as well. And so we don't want to, fall into any kind of a triumphalism. There is sometimes a papal cult among Catholics and so on, and this Pope doesn't want it. He doesn't want it. He doesn't want to have a big limousine. He doesn't want to live in a palace and so on. So these are all wonderful things. But when we want to also to think with him and what task there is, and also practically, Protestant, Muslims or whatever, to help him, because he cannot do all that. The bank alone in Rome, the bank is a fascist foundation, he has it there. The whole church state is a fascist foundation by Mussolini. So all these are hang-ups, my God, but they have to be thought through if we want to be really realistic. And we must be realistic, and what we think about it also must be effective. Not say I did my best and God does the rest or so. So we have to be responsible, and really think and grow up. And I hope he wants us to grow up. Just think of this one thing, Holy Father. There it is already. Holy Father. You know what the New Testament says. Don't call anybody Father. You have only one Father in heaven, and that's it. Now we call him Father. The journalist told that to John Paul II, How can you call yourself Holy Father? He said, we have done it for so long, we can't stop it anymore. That's not an answer. The answer is grow up. Okay, that is all for today, and we meet again a week from today. Now be careful with this ice out there. This worries me the whole night already. What do we do? Do we have salt?
Yes.
Salt of the earth?
There's salt upstairs by the back door, and somebody can go up and get a bucket of it.
Really?
Yeah. I can't carry it,
Yeah.
so there is some of it.
When we look for that salt? Or just with your car, just drive right to the door there. I mean, it's illegal, but sometimes you have to do things, right?
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I'll see you again on Friday.